Okay, I'm just giving an example. This is comparable when we do our English academic writing. We have to follow about the same format of writing. So, what are the formulaic components of academic writing for different disciplines? Well, that's the second topic that I want to discuss. Now, as I described earlier, the structural coherence for typical academic writing includes 8 parts: the title, the abstract, introduction, method, result, discussion, conclusion, and references. That's for the structural coherence. Let's look at the lexical coherence. That means in terms of the language structure, what is expected of a writer. Now, you should have argumentative purpose, okay? Then the research gap identification, and then the problematizing approach, and then the rational tone, and then the relevant content, and a cohesive style, and the semantic expressiveness, and the reader awareness. Well, this is kind of things that a writer has to keep in mind when you organize your languages, or when you put to actual writing the sentences that you compose for the writing. You have to bear this in mind, because the editor is going to look for these components in the writing and in the text. Let's look more specifically at this lexical components. First of all, let's look at an argumentative purpose. The argumentative purpose of academic writing is to argue or posit a point of view about a given topic, which is in some way informative or unique than previously stated. So in other words, you have to start describing something which you think is different from previous studies or arguments made by scholars in the past. So it seeks to demonstrate new knowledge or thinking about a given topic against those of the old ones or in the past research. Let's give an example. Here's a statement in one of my articles. It says, hence, the primary aim of the study was to examine the relationship among human styles, optimism, and aspects of mental health among Chinese young people in Hong Kong and mainland. And it is emphasized that this study is the first one of its kind conducted in Chinese society, and hopefully its results will be supportive of previous findings regarding different aspects of human styles of mental health. The argumentative purpose of the statement to show that I want to do the study to complement previous studies. So I'm stating the goal and the value of the study to others. Here is another example. The study hereby extends the previous works on the comparison between Hong Kong, China and mainland China to a comparison between Westerner and the Chinese cultures. It seeks to address cultural differences in creativity, judgment, and specifically the basis of judgment in aesthetic and meritorious salience of creativity. And in this paragraph, I'm trying to state the goal and value of the study as the argumentative purpose of this paper. The second thing the writers has to be aware is called research gap identification. Basically, the identification of a research gap is to present one's disagreement with someone else, interpretation of certain research findings or research methods. The lack of agreement could be mild, moderate, or strong, depending on how a writer wants to make his or her points. The research gaps are generally presented at the introduction of a paper. The writer usually begins by introducing a topic and establish its importance by citing relevant references which are important in the field. The writer also needs to point out something that has not been well considered or well examined before. To put it short, research gap identification is to find a flaw, find a problem in previous studies, and it's purpose of your study to fill up the gap or to do something along the line to make the study or make the work more informative or more fulfilling for the field of study. I'll give you an example. Although the 4 styles of humor have been examined cross-culturally, few empirical studies have examined cross-cultural differences on general humor perceptions. So by making this statement, I try to point out the missing area of study, which is also what I want to contribute to this area of study. Here's another example. What is missing in the previous study, however, is a broader cross-cultural comparison between the Chinese and the Western cultures. Substantiating findings on creativity judgment using a comparative perspective is the focus of the present study. And in so doing, I'm also pointing out missing area of study and also the value of my study accordingly. So this is sort of a research gap identification. And as an editor or reviewer of a paper, I'm looking for this part, and it has to be well stated. The third thing that a writer has to be aware is called problematizing approach. And basically, problematizing approach means to present a new point of view on a topic which is different from previous points of view, as considered being problematic in one way or another. And it creates a new rationale for reconsidering or re-evaluating the old topic, either it's for the studies or the theoretical propositions. Now here I give you an example. Given these findings, it is plausible to speculate that optimism, being an essential component of positive affect and subjective well-being, should contribute to the greater use of adaptive styles of humor and the less use of maladaptive styles of humor. However, there has not been any study that has directly examined such a pattern of associations in the literature of either humor or optimism studies. Now, in this paragraph, I try to point out the existing problem in the research and also highlight what I want to do for improving the studies. Here is another example. Intriguing as the above findings are, they suffer 2 major drawbacks. First, the sample was relatively small and mostly came from South China. And secondly, there was no direct empirical evidence of the participants' preference of the collective goals of creativity to that of individualistic ones. Now, in such a way, I try to point out the existing problem in the present studies, and this will pave the way for the necessity of doing my study along the line. Okay, the fourth thing that the writer needs to keep in mind is called rational tone. Specifically, rational tone means that the writer seeks to persuade or impress the reader by presenting some carefully explained arguments. In other words, the rational tone means to present fact-driven information rather than speculation-based information. But by fact-driven is that to I'm not starting from my observation, my speculation, my thinking. I'm speaking with facts, empirical findings. Whereas speculation-based judgment or information means out of your own imagination, your intuition, your beliefs of something which have not been empirically substantiated. So we have to make sure whatever you say is fact-driven rather than what you believe, what you think. That's called a rational tone. Let's give you an example of a rational tone. In China, humor was first documented around 2,000 years ago. The Chinese term 滑稽 is regarded as an alternative word for humor, meaning wit, irony, and sarcasm. In this short statement, I provide well-documented factual information rather than speculative information. And here is another example. Optimism is an important predictor of social adjustment, and many studies have shown it to be positively associated with aspects of psychological and physical well-being in a range of cultures, including mainland China and Hong Kong Chinese society. And in this sentence, I was providing well-documented fact information rather than speculative information. You could see. Okay, the fifth thing the writer keeps in mind is called relative content. The relative content means to present related and supporting information that either credits arguments a writer makes or discredits information that is previously provided by some other writers. The relative content ensures that the information provided is related to the present topic of discussion or exploration. That means a lot of writers present irrelevant, unrelated information in a paper which only confuses, eventually only confuses the readers, rather than explain your point more clearly. So I give you an example of a relevant content. Previous research has shown that humor may be viewed as a multidimensional positive personality characteristic with a number of facilitative effects. In recent decades, psychological or subjective well-being has been a focus of research attention, including cross-cultural research. Now, because this paper is about humor and optimism, I was trying to present information or any empirical findings which are directly related to the topic of my paper. And here is another example. Alternatively, the traditional Chinese social system is still rigid, defensive, and discouraging of independence. It stresses that the importance of social harmony can be achieved through compromises and conformity. Humor, being informal and impersonal in nature, is everything that is inconsistent with the above prized values in Chinese society. Now, in this paragraph, I was trying to present information that's related to a cultural analysis of importance of humor in Chinese society. This is just to give relevant information that is relevant to the present discussion. The sixth thing that a writer has to keep in mind is the cohesive style. Specifically, cohesive style means to present an integrated and interrelated flow of information on a given topic under discussion. The key word is interrelated and integrated. And a cohesive style enables writer to write sentences that are consistent and coherent in one way or another. Let's give an example. Humor is a universal activity that is typically elicited in social contexts involving the perception of playful, non-serious gratuity. The perception and appreciation of humor may be circumstantial and are culturally embedded. For example, Chinese people tend to despise and appreciate humor at the same time. Now, you can see in this sentence, I was trying to keep the active voice constant. So it's all humor, and how humor is perceived in Chinese society. Here is another example. Humor and satire following the Confucian Puritanism and conservatism were regarded as the inferior forms of aesthetic expression and were thus devalued for centuries. Humor's writings were considered as unorthodox and could only be found in unorthodox writings. And in such a way, you can see I'm keeping the passive voice consistent. So this is what I mean the coherent structuring. Okay. Now, let's continue to give other examples, the examples of lexical cohesiveness. Now, here is a sentence. Specifically, individuals who hold positive expectations for the future tend to see desired outcomes as attainable and to persist in their goal-directed efforts. And in contrast, individuals who hold negative expectations for the future tend to assume that bad things will happen and withdraw effort more easily, thus becoming passive and finally giving up on achieving their goals. And this is like if you try to keep the subject or the verb of a sentence constant. If you want to switch to passive voice or to nouns, you have to keep that form consistent or constant as well. And here is another example of lexical cohesiveness. In daily communication, humor improves human relations. Ameliorates the communicative atmosphere and evidences the user's personal wit, attractiveness, and education. Most individuals, therefore, aspire to have a warm and humorous personality. Now you can see in this sentence I was keeping the verbs constant. Let's just look at another example of a idiomatic expressiveness. This echoes the previous findings that the Chinese people generally consider themselves as being non-humorous, even though they may be highly appreciative of humor. Using echo to mean support as expressive in its expression. It is expressive in a special way. Here is another example of idiomatic expressiveness. Hence, in tone with Plato's assertion that what is honored in one's country is what will be cultivated. Conformity, humility, and a social formality are what has been valued in Chinese culture for thousands of years. Humor, being informal and impersonal in nature, is everything that is inconsistent with the above-pressed values in Chinese society, such that Chinese people sometimes even try to avoid humorous people. Now, you can see in this sentence I was trying to use in tone with to mean is inconsistent with. So this is the use of words that are parallel together. All right, the seventh thing a writer needs to keep in mind is the hedging words and expressions. Hedges are words or expressions that show hesitation, uncertainty, or doubt on the part of the writer with respect to his or her claims. So hedging is an important way for writers to direct readers' flow of thoughts and to inform the reader the highlighted information on the selected topics. In short, hedging or hedging words is to show some degree of uncertainty, doubt regarding what you write, and that's called hedging words. Now, let's give you an example of hedging words and expressions. This should include not only college students from different parts of China, but also people from different walks of life. It would be important to find ways to recruit and effectively survey people in rural China so as to examine how the relative lack of economic prosperity might affect the Chinese ambivalence towards humor, since the connection with optimism is clearly complex. Now I'm using sort of doubtful words to mean something that should have been done or needs to be done further. So in a more of a polite or suggestive mode of expression. Now here's a table. It's the common hedging words and expressions during writing, like modal verbs like may, might, can, could, would, should, or other verbs like appear, include, seem, believe, suppose, presume, tend, and nouns, possibility, probability, likelihood, tendency, assumption, claim, suggestion, and then adjective words, possible, likely, unlikely, many, few, some, several, most, potential, considerable, and adverbs like usually, generally, frequently, occasionally, probably, arguably, mostly, possibly, likely, presumably, perhaps, somewhat, potentially, evidently, convincingly, apparently, hypothetically, and just expressions in general. If to, then, unless, specifically, more specifically, important as it is. Now, these are the common hedging words or expressions that a writer has to keep in mind. And you need to use them interchangeably to avoid repetition in writing. And also if you use them naturally, it will really make your paper look good, look easy to read. Now, here is another example of hedging words expressions. Hoo-ha students, compared to their counterparts in Hong Kong, used significantly more adaptive humor styles and used significantly less aggressive or self-defeating humor. This may reflect the fact that contemporary Chinese social systems still value very much social harmony in interpersonal communication, as use of adaptive humor could enhance social relations. Now, you can say I'm using hedging words to present my findings in a polite way, not in such of a assuring way, but in a suggestive way that the findings needs to be further verified or substantiated in later time. Okay, the seventh thing a writer needs to keep in mind is called a signal words or expressions. Specifically, in academic writing, review of past research sets the stage for the present discussion, and it should bear multiple analogical connections to the past research. For example, academic research writing usually contains many in-text citations, footnotes, and references to direct readers' attention from past findings to present discussion. And to avoid confusion of shifting from one academic voice to another, a writer needs to use signal words or phrases to ensure that the reader can follow his or her changing flow of thoughts. In such a way, signal words are typically verbs that a writer uses when referring to other voices or information in texts. Okay, let's give an example. Chen argued that the Chinese jokes have always focused on denial humor that criticized reality and complimentary humor that praised reality, in contrast with the pure humor that made people laugh in Western jokes. Now you can see when I used argued, which is to prepare the reader a shift of thinking in this expression. Here is another example. The findings confirmed the previous findings and supported our hypothesis that Westerners view humor differently from Chinese. Here I'll give you some more frequently used signal words and expressions. Okay, if you find an appropriate alternative for your stock phrase, for instance, 约 stated, 约 commented, 约 concluded, 约 clarified, or precede your quotes with suspense devices like as 约 noted, according to 约, in 约's view, as 约 put, or for 约. Okay, so this is like a very cute signal words that we have to learn to use. The eighth thing a writer needs to keep in mind is what is called meta-commentary expressions. Specifically, meta-commentary expressions are transit words a writer uses to alert readers to notice, understand, or further explain his or her arguments. And the meta expressions facilitate readers to understand or interpret the writer's arguments in logical ways. And here is an example. In other words, Easterners have a collectivistic orientation that blurs the distinction between self and others, so that they have a weaker perception regarding self-oriented and other-oriented humor. So like when I say, in other words, I want you to realize I'm saying something either summative or I'm just saying something else. So this is what is called meta-commentary expressions. And here is another example. On one hand, laughter releases excessive nervous energy. On the other hand, humor provides alternative perspectives about fear, sadness, or anger in the face of incongruence and amusing components. So I'm giving you, information that is interrelated, that is summative. So it could be metacognitions, it could be reader cues. All right, the ninth thing a writer needs to keep in mind is reader awareness refers to the writer's alertness to or understanding of the reader's knowledge about a topic under discussion. As such, the writer needs to explain key concepts of the paper clearly and sensibly to the reader. Don't take things for granted. The writer is particularly cautioned to not use undefined abbreviations, jargons, and special terms in texts. Let's give an example. The former includes affiliate humor in bracket used to amuse others and facilitate a relationship, and self-enhancing humor in bracket used to cope with stress and maintain a harmonious outlook during times of difficulty, whereas the latter includes aggressive humor in bracket, sarcastic, manipulative, put-on, or despairing humor, and self-defeating humor used for excessive self-disparagement, irritation, or defensive denial. Now, you can see in this short sentence, I explain what different humor styles mean. I do not take it for granted that you know what these terms mean. I would explain on the spot. And here is another example. Humor is a broad and a multifaceted concept. The Oxford English Dictionary defines humor as the faculty of observing what is ludicrous or amusing, or of expressing it, jocose imagination, or treatment of a subject. Now, in this statement, I was trying to explain what humor is, rather than leaving you to understand or imagine what a term means for yourself. All right, I've said so much about the lexical components or checkers of cohesiveness for proper academic paper writing. I hope you all know all these components in your writing. You will keep this in mind. And how to do this? Well, as one English proverb says, practice makes perfect. What does it mean for Chinese? Well, it means 熟能生巧. That means you keep on practice, it will become perfect.